The heavy oak doors of the Reich Chancellery swung shut with an ominous thud. Inside the cavernous office, decorated with massive paintings of Germanic warriors and lit by harsh electric lights, Adolf Hitler stood behind his enormous desk, his fingers drumming impatiently on the polished wood. It was late 1941, and the Führer was in one of his moods, oscillating between manic confidence and volcanic rage. His intelligence chief, Wilhelm Canaris, entered nervously, carrying a leather portfolio stuffed with reports from German agents in America. Hitler snatched the documents and began flipping through them, his eyes scanning the pages with predatory intensity. Then something unexpected happened. Hitler laughed. It wasn't the forced, theatrical laugh he used at rallies. This was genuine, spontaneous, the laugh of a man who had just heard something absurdly funny. He slapped the papers against his palm repeatedly, his face flushed with amusement. "Americaner," he spat between laughs. "Look at this, Canaris. Look at what they make." He jabbed a finger at a report detailing American industrial output. Refrigerators, washing machines, automobiles with chrome bumpers for fat housewives. They make toys, Canaris. Comfortable toys for comfortable people. The intelligence chief stood silently, knowing better than to interrupt when the Führer was on a roll. Hitler's voice dripped with contempt as he continued. "Their factories are scattered across a vast country. No coordination, no efficiency. Every manufacturer competing with every other. It's capitalism at its most chaotic and pathetic." He dropped the reports on his desk dismissively. "Germany has the Ruhr Valley, concentrated, organized, disciplined. We produce what the state commands when the state commands. We are a machine. They are a marketplace." He walked to the massive window overlooking the Chancellery Gardens, hands clasped behind his back in his characteristic pose. By the time those soft Americans retool their toy factories to produce weapons, if they can even figure out how, the war will be finished. The Reich will stretch from the Atlantic to the Urals. They will arrive too late with too little to matter. His generals nodded. His advisors murmured agreement. The numbers seemed to support Hitler's assessment. In 1941, Germany was an industrial powerhouse producing tanks, aircraft, and ammunition with impressive efficiency. The Luftwaffe had terrorized Europe. The Wehrmacht had crushed Poland in weeks, France in months. The German war machine seemed unstoppable. What Hitler didn't know, what he couldn't comprehend, was that he had just made one of history's most catastrophic miscalculations. The very qualities he mocked in American industry would become the instruments of his destruction. The laughter would not last long. Part 1. The Sleeping Giant Awakens. December 7, 1941. Pearl Harbor. The attack that was supposed to cripple America instead ignited it. Within hours of the Japanese assault, something profound stirred in the American psyche. The isolationist sentiment that had kept America on the sidelines evaporated like morning fog under a brutal sun. Factory workers, farmers, teachers, shopkeepers, millions of ordinary Americans, looked at the smoking ruins in Hawaii and made a collective decision. Never again. President Franklin D. Roosevelt understood the moment's gravity. In his address to Congress, he declared December 7th, a date which will live in infamy. But privately, he was already thinking beyond revenge. He was thinking about production. Roosevelt had seen this coming. For months, he'd been quietly preparing American industry for war, despite fierce political opposition. Now, with Pearl Harbor providing the catalyst, he could unleash the full power of American capitalism toward a single goal: victory through overwhelming material superiority. On December 29, 1941, just 3 weeks after Pearl Harbor, Roosevelt delivered one of his famous fireside chats. His voice crackled through radios in living rooms across America. "We must be the great arsenal of democracy. For us, this is an emergency as serious as war itself. We must apply ourselves to our task with the same resolution, the same sense of urgency, the same spirit of patriotism and sacrifice as we would show were we at war. The arsenal of democracy." The phrase captured something essential about America's role in the coming conflict. While Britain and the Soviet Union would provide the blood, America would provide the steel, aluminum, rubber, and gasoline, rivers of it, oceans of it, more than the Axis powers could possibly imagine. But first, the impossible had to become possible. ## Part 2. The man with a crazy idea. Charles Emil Sorensen was not a typical visionary. Born in Denmark, immigrated to America as a child, he'd worked his way up through the Ford Motor Company by being ruthlessly practical. He understood metal, machinery, and most importantly, the assembly line. He'd helped Henry Ford perfect the moving assembly line that revolutionized automobile production. Now, in early 1942, Sorensen faced the biggest challenge of his career. The government had approached Ford with an audacious question. Could automobile manufacturing techniques be applied to building bombers? Traditional aircraft production was artisanal. Skilled craftsmen assembled planes piece by piece in stationary positions, like medieval blacksmiths forging suits of armor. A good factory might produce one heavy bomber per day. The Consolidated Aircraft Company in San Diego, which designed the B-24 Liberator, was considered highly efficient. They could build one every 2 days. America needed thousands of bombers. Tens of thousands. At the current production rate, the war would be over before enough planes reached the front. Sorensen studied the blueprints for the B-24 Liberator. It was a beast, a 4-engine heavy bomber stretching 67 feet long with a 110-foot wingspan. It required 1.2 million parts, 30,000 rivets, 13,500 bolts, miles of wiring, complex hydraulic systems, for engines and intricate control surfaces. Each plane weighed 36,000 pounds empty and could carry another 30,000 pounds of fuel and bombs. Most aeronautical engineers said it was impossible to mass-produce such complexity. Aircraft weren't cars. They required precision, skill, careful craftsmanship. Sorensen disagreed. Everything is just parts, he told his skeptical team. We break it down into components, we standardize, we create sub-assemblies, and we move them through stations. It's all just manufacturing. His plan was breathtaking in scope. He would build the largest factory building in the world, a mile-long behemoth in Willow Run, Michigan, near Detroit. The main assembly building alone would cover 3.5 million square feet. At one end, raw materials would enter. At the other end, finished bombers would roll out. It would be an assembly line for airplanes. Everyone thought he was insane. ## Part 3. Building the impossible. Construction on Willow Run began in April 1942. The scale was staggering. The main building stretched 3,200 feet long, over half a mile. At its widest point, it spread 1,280 feet across. The ceiling soared 4 stories high to accommodate the vertical tail fins of B-24s moving down the line. Inside, Sorensen's team designed a revolutionary system. The assembly process would be broken into major sections: nose, cockpit, fuselage, wings, tail, engines. Each section would have its own subassembly line. Then the major components would converge on the main line for final assembly. But building the factory was only the beginning. The real challenge was finding workers. Before Pearl Harbor, Willow Run didn't exist. The area was farmland. Now Sorensen needed 40,000 workers. Machinists, riveters, welders, electricians, inspectors. In a nation where millions of young men were being drafted into the military, where was he supposed to find 40,000 skilled workers? The answer came from an unexpected source: American women. ## Part 4. Rosie the Riveter's real story. Her name was Rose Monroe, though history would remember her by her nickname, Rosie the Riveter. Before the war, she'd been a waitress in Kentucky. She'd never held a rivet gun. She'd never read a blueprint. She'd certainly never built an airplane. But in 1942, with her husband in the Navy and 2 children to feed, Rose saw an advertisement. Women wanted for war work, good pay, training provided. She applied at Willow Run and was hired on the spot. Rose was one of thousands. Teachers became welders. Shop clerks became machinists. Housewives became hydraulic specialists. Many had never worked outside the home. Now they were building the most advanced aircraft in the world. The transformation was remarkable. Women who'd been told their entire lives that mechanical work was men's work discovered they were natural engineers. Their smaller hands could reach into tight spaces. Their attention to detail made them excellent inspectors. Their determination, fueled by fathers, brothers, husbands, and sons fighting overseas, made them unstoppable. The government launched a propaganda campaign to recruit women workers. Posters showed strong, confident women in work clothes with the slogan, "We can do it." The image of Rosie the Riveter, bandana on her head, sleeve rolled up, flexing her bicep, became an icon. But the real Rosies faced harsh realities. The work was dangerous. Rivet guns kicked back violently. Metal shards flew through the air. Industrial accidents were common. Women lost fingers, suffered burns, broke bones. Some died. The hours were brutal 10, 12, sometimes 14-hour shifts 6 or 7 days a week. The factory floor was freezing in winter, sweltering in summer. The noise was deafening. The constant bang 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 of thousands of rivet guns, the shriek of metal cutting machines, the roar of engine tests. And there was constant pressure. Every day, production targets were posted. Every delay was noted. Every defect was investigated. The workers knew that soldiers' lives depended on their work. A loose bolt, a weak rivet, a faulty wire. Any mistake could cause a bomber to crash, killing a crew of 10 young men. Despite everything, they kept working. More than that, they excelled. The first B-24 rolled off the Willow Run assembly line in September 1942. It had taken 5 months of painful trial and error, countless revisions, and tremendous frustration. But it proved the concept worked. Then came the hard part, scaling up. Sorensen's team continuously refined the process. They studied every movement, eliminated every wasted step, optimized every station. They invented new tools and techniques. They trained workers with unprecedented efficiency. What once required years of apprenticeship was now taught in weeks. The factory became a living organism, pulsing with activity 24 hours a day. 3 shifts kept the line moving constantly. Workers poured in from all over America, Michigan, Kentucky, Tennessee, Oklahoma. Housing developments sprang up around Willow Run. The local population exploded from a few thousand to over 50,000. The assembly line itself was a marvel of choreography. Picture it. A bare metal fuselage enters at one end. As it moves down the mile-long line, it passes through dozens of stations. At the first stations, workers install the frame and structural supports. Further down, electricians thread miles of wiring through the fuselage. Hydraulic specialists install the complex systems for landing gear and flaps. Sheet metal workers rivet the outer skin. Meanwhile, on parallel lines, wings are being constructed, massive structures requiring perfect symmetry and precision. Engines are being assembled and tested. Tail sections are being fitted with control surfaces. Everything converges at specific points on the main line. Wings attach to the fuselage with hundreds of bolts. The tail section is mated to the rear. For massive engines, each weighing over 1,200 pounds, are hoisted into place and secured. Further down, the bomber receives its instruments, radios, guns, and bomb sights. Painters apply olive drab camouflage and identification numbers. Inspectors check thousands of points, looking for any defect. Finally, at the end of the line, test pilots climb into the cockpit of a brand new bomber that didn't exist 24 hours earlier. They fire up the engines, the thunderous roar shaking the entire factory, and taxi it out to the airfield for final flight testing. By mid-1943, Willow Run was producing 1 B-24 every hour. By 1944, production hit peak efficiency. 1 complete bomber every 63 minutes. Let that sink in. Every 63 minutes, a 4-engine heavy bomber containing 1.2 million parts rolled out of Willow Run. A flying fortress capable of carrying 5,000 pounds of bombs across 2,000 miles. Every hour, around the clock, 7 days a week. But Willow Run was just one factory. Across America, the production miracle was being replicated on a staggering scale. Boeing plants in Seattle, Wichita, and Renton were churning out B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-29 Superfortresses. Douglas Aircraft was mass-producing C-47 transport planes and SBD dive bombers. North American Aviation was building P-51 Mustang fighters. Lockheed was producing P-38 Lightnings. Republic was making P-47 Thunderbolts. Every major American city became a war production center. Detroit made tanks and aircraft. Pittsburgh made steel. Los Angeles made ships and planes. New York made everything. The South, long economically depressed, boomed with new factories producing ammunition, uniforms, and vehicles. Small towns transformed overnight. A sleepy farming community might suddenly house a massive ammunition plant employing 10,000 workers. Victory gardens appeared in every yard. Scrap metal drives collected everything from old cars to tin cans. Rubber drives gathered every spare tire. Nothing was wasted. The numbers became astronomical. In 1944 alone, the peak year of production, American factories produced 96,318 aircraft, 17,000 tanks, 51,000 artillery pieces, 41 billion rounds of ammunition, millions of rifles, machine guns, and pistols, hundreds of cargo ships. To put this in perspective, America produced more aircraft in 1944 than Germany, Japan, and Italy combined produced during the entire war. The scale was so vast it defied comprehension. Averaged across all factories, American industry was completing one aircraft every 5 minutes. Not every 5 minutes per factory, every 5 minutes total, nationwide. Imagine standing at a central point and watching, at 12 o'clock, a fighter plane. At 12:05, a bomber. At 12:10, a transport. At 12:15, another fighter. Hour after hour, day after day, month after month. This was the industrial might Hitler had mocked. This was the soft America that made refrigerators and washing machines. Hermann Göring, Hitler's second-in-command and head of the Luftwaffe, was the first Nazi leader to understand the disaster unfolding. By 1943, Luftwaffe intelligence was reporting impossible numbers from America. Göring didn't believe them. He accused his intelligence officers of defeatism, of believing Allied propaganda. Then the evidence became undeniable. Wave after wave of American bombers began appearing over Germany. Not dozens, hundreds. The 8th Air Force launched raids with 500, 700, sometimes over 1,000 bombers at once, escorted by hundreds more fighters. The sky literally darkened with American aircraft. Göring's pilots reported with desperation that for every American plane they shot down, 2 more appeared the next day. The Luftwaffe was bleeding to death, not because German pilots lacked skill or courage, but because they were outnumbered 10-1, 20-1, sometimes worse. In a private meeting, Göring reportedly exploded at his staff. "Where are these planes coming from? How many factories do they have? We bomb their factories and more planes appear. It's impossible." But it wasn't impossible. It was American mass production. German factories, despite their vaunted efficiency, were producing about 40,000 aircraft per year at peak. Impressive, but utterly inadequate against an opponent producing 100,000. Moreover, German production was spread thin: fighters, bombers, reconnaissance planes, transport aircraft, trying to cover multiple fronts with limited resources. American production was concentrated on a few key types and produced in overwhelming numbers. The B-24 Liberator alone saw 18,482 units built, more than any other American military aircraft in history. One model, one mission, strategic bombing. Quantity had become a quality all its own. Hitler's response, when he finally grasped the situation, was characteristic: rage and denial. He blamed Göring, blamed the factory managers, blamed saboteurs and defeatists. He demanded new superweapons, jet fighters, V-rockets, wonder weapons that would turn the tide. But no superweapon could overcome the fundamental arithmetic. Germany was a country of 70 million trying to outproduce America with 130 million, plus Britain, plus the Soviet Union. The combined Allied production dwarfed anything the Axis could achieve. The war had become a contest of industrial capacity, and Germany had already lost. The production miracle came with a price that's often forgotten in the triumphant statistics. At Willow Run alone, Industrial accidents killed dozens of workers and injured thousands. People lost fingers to presses, suffered burns from welding torches, fell from scaffolding, were crushed by heavy machinery. The rush to meet production quotas sometimes meant safety protocols were shortened or skipped. Women workers faced particular challenges. Sexual harassment was rampant. Many male supervisors resented women in their factories. Childcare was inadequate. Mothers often worked while worrying about children left with neighbors or relatives. When the war ended, women were summarily fired to make room for returning veterans, despite their proven skills. African Americans flocked to factory jobs, escaping the Jim Crow South for better opportunities in northern cities. But they faced discrimination even in defense plants. Race riots erupted in Detroit in 1943, partly fueled by tensions over housing and jobs. The arsenal of democracy was still segregated, still unequal. The environmental cost was also staggering. Factories poured pollutants into rivers and smoke into the air with no regulation. Toxic chemicals were handled with minimal protection. Many workers would suffer health consequences for decades. Yet despite everything, the workers kept coming, kept building, kept producing. They understood what was at stake. This wasn't just about paychecks, though the wages were good. This was about defeating fascism, about protecting democracy, about ensuring their husbands and sons came home alive. Every rivet they drove, every bolt they tightened, every wire they connected was personal. It meant something beyond the factory floor. May 8, 1945. Germany surrenders. Hitler was dead, hiding in a Berlin bunker as Soviet artillery pounded the city to rubble. Göring had been captured. The vaunted Wehrmacht was destroyed. The mighty Luftwaffe was grounded for lack of fuel and planes. Above the ruins of the Reich flew aircraft bearing American stars, thousands of them, an aerial armada that had pounded Germany relentlessly for 3 years. The strategic bombing campaign hadn't won the war alone, but it had been crucial. It destroyed German industry, crippled transportation, diverted resources to air defense, and demoralized the population. Those bombers had rolled off assembly lines in Michigan, Kansas, Washington, and California. They'd been built by women who'd never held tools before. They'd been produced using techniques developed for making automobiles, the very toy factories Hitler had mocked. The final tally was almost incomprehensible. During World War II, American factories produced approximately 300,000 aircraft, 86,000 tanks, 193,000 artillery pieces, 2.4 million trucks, 2,600 Liberty ships and cargo vessels, 8,800 naval vessels including carriers, battleships, and destroyers, 41 billion rounds of ammunition, billions of other items from boots to bandages. This represented roughly 40% of all munitions produced by all combatants combined. America, entering the war late, outproduced every other nation, friend or foe. Hitler had laughed at American industrial capacity in 1941. By 1945, that laughter had been drowned out by the thunder of tens of thousands of American-built aircraft, tanks, and guns reducing his Reich to rubble. The joke, in the end, was definitively on him. After the war, Willow Run faced an uncertain future. By the time Japan surrendered in August 1945, the factory had produced 8,685 B-24 Liberators, nearly half of all B-24s ever built. It had employed over 40,000 workers and had become a symbol of American industrial might. But with peace came contraction. The government canceled military contracts. Workers were laid off by the thousands. The massive facility, a mile of factory floor, suddenly had no purpose. For decades, Willow Run struggled to find its identity. Parts of it were sold off. Kaiser Frazer used a section for automobile production. General Motors took over portions for manufacturing. Much of it sat idle. Roswell Monroe, the real-life Rosie the Riveter, went on to drive taxis and eventually owned a construction company. She remained proud of her wartime service until her death in 1997. Thousands of other women who'd built bombers returned to traditional roles. Some willingly, others resentfully, all of them changed by what they'd accomplished. The building itself was nearly demolished multiple times. By the 2000s, much of the historic structure had been torn down. After the war, Willow Run faced an uncertain future. By the time Japan surrendered in August 1945, the factory had produced 8,685 B-24 Liberators, nearly half of all B-24s ever built. It had employed over 40,000 workers and had become a symbol of American industrial might. But with peace came contraction. The government canceled military contracts. Workers were laid off by the thousands. The massive facility, a mile of factory floor, suddenly had no purpose. For decades, Willow Run struggled to find its identity. Parts of it were sold off. Kaiser Frazer used a section for automobile production. General Motors took over portions for manufacturing. Much of it sat idle. Roswell Monroe, the real-life Rosie the Riveter, went on to drive taxis and eventually owned a construction company. She remained proud of her wartime service until her death in 1997. Thousands of other women who'd built bombers returned to traditional roles. Some willingly, others resentfully. All of them changed by what they'd accomplished. The building itself was nearly demolished multiple times. By the 2000s, much of the historic structure had been torn down, but preservationists fought to save a portion. Today, a small section of the original Willow Run plant houses the Yankee Air Museum, preserving the memory of what happened there. Charles Sorensen retired from Ford in 1944, his mission accomplished. He'd proven that American manufacturing ingenuity could be adapted to any challenge, even building flying fortresses on an assembly line. He died in 1968, having witnessed American industry dominate the 20th century. The lessons of Willow Run endure. It demonstrated that seemingly impossible engineering challenges can be overcome with determination, innovation, and coordination. It showed that ordinary people, given proper training and motivation, can achieve extraordinary things. It proved that democracy, with its messy capitalism and competing interests, could mobilize and focus with devastating effectiveness when threatened. Most importantly, it revealed the fatal flaw in Hitler's ideology. He believed that authoritarian efficiency would always triumph over democratic chaos. He thought military might came from discipline and will. He mocked America's consumer culture and industrial freedom. He was catastrophically wrong. American soft power, the ability to produce refrigerators and washing machines, translated seamlessly into hard power when needed. The same factories that made consumer goods could make bombers. The same workers who assembled cars could assemble fighters. The same engineers who designed comfortable vehicles could design weapons of war. Democracy wasn't weak because it prioritized prosperity and consumer choice. It was strong precisely because of those qualities. A system that could efficiently produce millions of automobiles for a free market could, when necessary, efficiently produce millions of weapons for war. Hitler learned this lesson too late, as American-built bombers reduced his Reich to ashes. The story of Hitler mocking American factories is more than a tale of hubris punished. It's a profound lesson about the nature of power, the strength of free societies, and the danger of underestimating opponents. Hitler saw American factories making refrigerators and assumed weakness. He failed to understand that a nation sophisticated enough to give every family a car and a washing machine possessed industrial capacity beyond his comprehension. He mistook prosperity for softness, choice for chaos, freedom for weakness. He woke a sleeping giant and filled it with terrible resolve. American production during World War II remains one of history's most remarkable achievements. In 4 years, a nation that had been isolationist, divided, and struggling with economic depression transformed itself into the world's greatest industrial power. The arsenal of democracy produced more weapons, ships, planes, and munitions than all other combatants combined. This wasn't accomplished through authoritarian command, but through democratic coordination. Private companies competed for contracts. Unions negotiated with management. Workers had choices about where to work. Yet somehow, this apparently chaotic system produced results that exceeded every centrally planned economy. The women and men of Willow Run, and thousands of factories like it, didn't win the war alone. Soldiers fought and died on battlefields across the world. Sailors braved submarines in the North Atlantic. Pilots flew into flak-filled skies over Germany. Marines stormed beaches in the Pacific. But those soldiers, sailors, pilots, and Marines fought with overwhelming material superiority because Americans back home were building a plane every 5 minutes. Hitler's laughter echoed in the Reich Chancellery in 1941, full of contempt for American refrigerator factories. By 1945, that laughter had been silenced forever, drowned out by the roar of 300,000 American-built aircraft engines, the rumble of 86,000 American-built tanks, and the thunder of American industrial might unleashed. The factory workers of Detroit, Seattle, Los Angeles, and 1,000 other American cities had proven something profound. Democracies don't just survive through military valor. They survive through production capacity, through innovation, through the collective strength of free people working toward a common goal. They survive by turning refrigerator factories into aircraft plants. And when they do, dictators learn too late that mockery is no substitute for manufacturing, that contempt is no match for capacity, and that ideological certainty cannot overcome industrial reality. The last laugh belonged to Rosie the Riveter and the millions like her, ordinary Americans who built an extraordinary victory, one rivet at a time.